So in this tutorial we're going to create this ray gun, and we're going to just use basic primitives and deformers, and that's pretty much it. So this is a tutorial that's designed to just help you think about how to break objects down into components and then build those up out of simple shapes. So this is the ray gun here, and it's made from this image here that we've got. So we want to use this as some reference so that we can build it pretty accurately in cinema. So let's just create a new scene here. And what I'm going to do is just go to my 4x4 view, and this is a side-on view, and I want my gun to be built along the z-axis. So on this right-hand side here, I want to use this in the background, this image, so that I can get some good reference. So all I need to do for that is just to drag and drop it into the background, and then it's placed in the background, and I can build and use it as reference. Now it's a little bit bright, the background's white, it's really got a lot of color and contrast, and if I start building objects over the top of it, it'll be a little bit hard to see the objects. So what I'm going to do is just change the settings on this viewport a little bit. So if I go to the options menu, go to configure, and the background, or the back, what I want to do is change first of all the transparency of that background, so I can make that fairly transparent. Also, what I want to do is, if we look at this ray gun, the body and the barrel of the gun are all lined up sort of nicely on one axis there, and then we've got the fin and the handle and trigger and so on sort of around that. So what I want to do is build all these primitive shapes along that axis, because obviously when we create primitives they appear at the origin on the ground plane. So what I want to do is shift this image so the ground plane axis runs through the middle of this. So I can just go to my offset values in the configure tab, and I'm just going to shift this in the y-axis. Let's just zoom in a little bit, and I'm just going to shift it up and down a little bit until it looks like that is sitting pretty much on the center axis, which that looks about right to me. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. So what I want to do now is I'm going to start with the barrel, and I'm going to make the barrel out of a bunch of cylinders. And the reason I'm going to use cylinders is because, well, basically it's a cylinder shape, but also the cylinder can have curved edges. We've got a fillet option, so I think that's a good place to start. So actually let's maximize this view, and let's create a cylinder and get started. So create primitive cylinder, and I want to make this along the z-axis. So let's just change this to the z-axis. I'm going to just slide it. Now this is really important. When I make all the primitives that make up the body of this ray gun, I'm only going to move them forwards and backwards on the z-axis. I don't want to move them up and down or side to side at all. I'm only going to move them on this axis. So let's get in here and create this part of the barrel. So if we select the cylinder, we can change the radius of the cylinder. And I'm just going to creep that into place, and let's change the height of this. And we've got this rounding, and as I said before, if we go to the caps on our cylinder, we can turn on fillet, and that gives us a rounded edge. So let's change that fillet radius, and we can see that and just kind of roughly match it up with what we see in the background image. Now, just looking a little closer at this, this edge looks a little angular and hard, and if I go to my perspective view, if we get in closer here, it's a little angular along there. So what we want to do is we want to add some more segments into our fillet, which is the curved edge on the cylinder, and just smooth it out a little more. So I'm going to put it up to maybe, let's say 10 segments, and that's looking a lot smoother. So that's the first bit of the barrel done. Now this other part of the barrel is actually thicker, so I'm going to use a separate cylinder for that, and I'm going to use cylinders for all these three rings that are around the barrel as well. So let's make this other piece of barrel first. Now here's a really handy trick in cinema. Any object, when you move it, if you hold down the command key, it will duplicate. And see how my cursor has changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag on this blue axis, but I'm going to hold down the command key, and that will create a duplicate cylinder. So now let's change the radius on that cylinder and make it a little bigger, and let's make the height of it a little longer. Now, we're not really going to see the ends of the cylinder that makes up the other part of this barrel here, so we don't need this extra filleted edge at all on that cylinder. So I'm going to go back to the caps and actually just turn off the fillet for that one. We don't need it. It would just be extra geometry that's unnecessary. So I'm just going to leave that as it is. Okay, so let's grab our filleted cylinder again, because we're going to duplicate this for the rings on the barrel. And again, hold down the command key, drag it, and I'm going to place it in the middle of this ring here. Then I'm going to go to its object tab. I'm going to change the radius of it. And just try and get that about right. And I'm going to change the height. And maybe just slide it to make sure it's pretty much in the right place. And that looks pretty good. So let's command drag this along a little further. And let's change the radius of that one. Now my ray gun that I make might not match exactly with the background image, but it's going to be pretty close, and that'll be good enough. Okay, so command drag again, and let's make the radius this one a little bit bigger, and the height a bit bigger. And there we go. That looks like our barrel part's made. Let's have a look at our perspective view. Zoom out a little bit. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Now, one thing I can notice just looking at this is that it looks a little angular around the edges. I can see these little sharp edges. It's not super smooth looking. Now, what I can do is go to my options menu, my display menu, and turn on this grow shading with lines. And this will show us the amount of segments or subdivisions on each of the primitives. Now, I can see, looking at the fillet, I've got quite a few subdivisions, or these lines down around creating the curve of the fillet. So that looks nice and smooth there. But if we look around the ring of the cylinders, there's not many subdivisions, and it really looks pretty angular, and I want it really smooth. So I want to, let's say if I grab this cylinder here and go to its object tab, I can look at its rotation segments, which are the divisions around it, and I can turn those up and make that really smooth. Now, these are all cylinders here, so just as a quick shortcut, I can select all the cylinders, and then I can set a value, and that will change for all of those, because this rotation segments is a common setting for all of these objects. So that's a really handy little tip there. I've set 48 segments. When I make cylindrical type objects out of primitives, I like to set a number here that divides easily by 4, just in case we end up splitting things in half or quarter when we're modeling. It's always a good idea to have a pretty regular number of divisions around your object. Just makes the mesh cleaner if we do any more future edits on it. So that's looking pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. That's the barrel part done. So in the next part, we will make the body of the ray gun, and we're going to use a deformer called an FFD deformer to create the sort of teardrop sort of sculpted shape of the body of that ray gun.